That's when sometimes big messages come. But anyway, I heard that someone will die at this documentary. And so I thought, whoa, no, no, no. I don't want to be part of something where someone dies. And I hope I'd much prefer to be in a different probability where someone doesn't die. But my inner self told me someone's going to die. And so I thought about this and I thought maybe I should write the documentary people and say, my inner self is telling me that someone's going to die. But then I thought they'll think I'm crazy, or they'll think that I have some weird desire. I'm going to secretly kill somebody or poison somebody or something. And so I thought I can't do that. And then I thought, okay, I'm just going to make a prayer that everything happens for the best reason and just leave it at that. So I go down to the documentary.
Now we begin toward another conversation with Robert Waggoner on the awareness of lucid dreaming and beyond lucid dreaming. So I'm so happy to be with you here today again, Robert. Thank you so much for joining.
Oh, thanks, Ruth. It's great to be here again.
Yes. As a recap, we filmed a conversation on what exists beyond lucid dreaming a bit earlier this year and explored lucid dreaming and related states such as the void light of awareness and the relationship between lucid dreaming, time, space, and information. So I am going to link that into the description box for listeners who have not yet listened to it. And for the listeners who have listened to it, I just want to express my gratitude for the really good feedback we got from that conversation and also asking for more subjects. So here we go. Here we're going to be exploring some more around those states today. Perfect. So we are going to move to our first theme, which is basically limits of our own control in lucid dreaming and the awareness. And just to be kind of clear, when we're talking about lucid dreaming, we are talking about the capability to become conscious in one's dreams and begin operating from there. Now, the first question for you, Robert, how do you understand the differences between dream figures we encounter in lucid dreams in terms of their knowledge, awareness, and even form? And have you encountered dream figures that have challenged your own mental model of how dream figures should be or act in a lucid dream?
Right. So just as a heads up to everyone watching, in my first book, I came up with a metaphor that the sailor does not control the sea, neither does the lucid dreamer control the dream. So a sailor can definitely manipulate the sailboat, manipulate themselves, but they also have to relate to the weather, the water, the waves, the wind, just all of that and the condition of the boat. And so in lucid dreaming, we really don't control the dream so much as we relate to it, but we have conscious awareness. So sometimes we can think through how we want to relate to things and proceed from there. And that's how it is when it comes to dream figures. A lot of us grow up in the Western society and we have kind of a Western viewpoint about dream figures that somehow they're all a part of us. They're some expression of something inside of us and they're out there. And I would say when I first started lucid dreaming back in 1975, I kind of had that same sort of thought that basically dream figures were some external projection of my own issues and all. And so I was in some regards relating to aspects of myself is one way of thinking about it. But as I went along deeper and deeper into lucid dreaming, I occasionally found dream figures who seemed to be aware and have their own agenda and their own sense of agency and actually seemed as intelligent and as conscious and as aware as myself, and also seemed a little bit more secure in the environment of dreaming than I was, because they could do things that I couldn't do. For example, one time I became lucid. It was outside of a library. I go into the library. I begin to ask people, "Hey, will you go fly with me?" I begin to ask dream figures that. And eventually I found a woman in the very back of the library. I asked her, "Would you go flying with me?" She put down her book and said, "Sure," and grabbed my arm and took me flying, and then stopped to show me things that I would not have been aware of if she hadn't pointed them out. So how do we explain that as a lucid dreamer? And the first thing I'd encourage people to think of is that dream figures vary. Some of them are projections of our own energy. Some of them are representations of symbolic or emotional issues that we're dealing with. And that's true, but not all of them. Sometimes you meet ones that are beyond the norm. So what you could say, well, perhaps this is an aspect of your greater self or your greater consciousness or your higher thinking or whatever. Okay, perhaps. But as you go along, you meet even stranger dream figures, like deceased dream figures. All of a sudden, you see your grandma and you think, wait a second, grandma passed away 10 years ago. Oh, this must be a dream. But then when grandma tells you something in that lucid dream that turns out to be a prediction and later it comes to pass, well, wait a second. Was that grandma as a dream figure? Was that a grandma as a representation of some aspect of your higher self? Or is that grandma as a spiritual being in the after death state? So it brings up all sorts of questions. The more you go exploring, the more you go investigating, that's when you really come to understand that dream figures vary and that the lucid dreamer does not control the dream so much as relates to it with their own awareness and keeps exploring from there.
Yes, and I think this is a really important point to bring up already early in the conversation because there does exist a somewhat misconception of that by becoming conscious in the dream, the lucid dreamer would control the dream, which of course is not true and it never will be true. And as I see it, they only limit the dream to serve their own waking self and the needs and perceptions and wants and desires of that waking self very momentarily. But simultaneously, it is a limitation to experience so much more that the dream could have to offer beyond that waking self. And relating to that, in your own practice, in your own lucid dreaming practice, what is your relationship to control? And has there been points in which the development of awareness in lucid dreaming has required more surrender and less control?
Right. So, at the very beginning of lucid dreaming, you kind of, you notice all the things that you can do, all the things you can influence, all the things that you manipulate. And if you really don't think about it too much, then you start to have this view that you control things. Well, it's more accurate and more honest. You can basically control yourself within the lucid dream, but you don't control everything because surprising things happen, unusual things happen. You open up a door into a new room and all of a sudden you're in a Mongolian yurt. You did not create that. You did not control that into being. It just happened. So that's why I really think it's so important to understand that lucid dreaming, yes, we influence and manipulate. Do we control? No, we don't totally control. Now, sometimes you see that is in this idea of surrender. And so, in a lucid dream, you can announce that now you're letting go of any sense of control. Now you're letting go of any sense of direction, and you're letting the lucid dream show you, or you surrender to it. And I remember Stephen LaBerge in his first book that came out in the end of 1985. Uh, he talked about this, that some of his most profound lucid dreams were ones where he announced within the lucid dream that he was surrendering to the highest. And you can take the highest however you want to think of it, as a spiritual thing or as a psychological thing, or however you want to think about the highest. But he just announced that now he had surrendered to the highest. And he said oftentimes at that point, he'd start floating through the universe with this incredible music happening and seeing religious symbols and all sorts of things. But he had surrendered and all this began to happen. And also it's important to see that he announced that he was surrendering and then this began to happen. So that's one thing that lucid dreamers begin to learn as they go deeper and deeper, is that sometimes the most incredible thing you can do, the most amazing thing you can do, is to let go and surrender. Now, one thing that happened to me as I went deeper on the lucid dreaming path is that sometimes in the lucid dream, I would hear the words, trust, nothing to fear. Trust, nothing to fear. Or I'd see a banner in the sky, trust, nothing to fear. And oftentimes that reminded me that if you have any sense of fear or concern or hesitancy, you're going to block or inhibit or limit what's going to happen in that lucid dream. But if you trust, then you can surrender. Then you can let go. But if you don't trust, it's very hard to surrender because you're really not surrendering at all. You might say you're surrendering, but nope. I'm not really surrendering. I'm failing to trust, and I think I'm kind of letting go, but I'm letting go and putting limits on it. But when I began to understand the importance of letting go of all fear, having an attitude of total trust, then it helped me have some pretty amazing experiences and take lucid dreaming even deeper. So this issue of surrender is very important. One thing I will say though, surrender, oftentimes it's best to happen after you've been an experienced lucid dreamer and come to trust the lucid dreaming environment. Uh, if you do it right at the beginning and you surrender, then you might freak yourself out because all sorts of unexpected stuff happens. And I wasn't ready for that unexpected stuff. And I don't know if I really trust this environment. And then it become, kind of a not a helpful event, but kind of a unexpected and sometimes a little bit frightful event. So lucid surrender is definitely part of the path of lucid dreaming, and it can lead to some very different kind of states than what you would normally expect.
Yes, people have a very interesting relationship with control. And by this, I mean human beings in general. That since also I have worked in cognitive psychology, it comes across quite often that people have an inbuilt need to control their surrounding, their performances, their relationships, their work life. And it's only natural that that reflects into the practice of lucid dreaming also. However, as a coach that I am, I do see the potential of using lucid dreaming to train ourselves to let go of that need to controlling the environment, because it is really a good example of one of these experiences that deepen when control is released. And also, sometimes paradoxically, by letting go of control, you actually get more control because it does stabilize your experience there. That as long as you are trying to control something, you are putting a lot of energy on what's outside of you, and so you're losing energy from yourself and your own intention. So sometimes by becoming the observer and training to be the observer, we kind of gain a bit more self-control than trying to control everything, if that makes sense. But also there is one tricky aspect to control, which is our beliefs, because they are unconscious forms of control that can affect the lucid dream and which we may not be so aware of. So have you come across how your own beliefs have affected lucid dreaming, and perhaps how changing beliefs can affect lucid dreaming?
Right. So that's what I considered in my first book. I wrote about beliefs and expectations as one of the reality creating principles of the lucid dream experience. And so If you believe something is possible, then it fundamentally becomes possible. But if you believe it's impossible, then it seems basically impossible to do that. And a lot of times I'll meet lucid dreamers who are writing me for help. Like they'll write, "Oh, in my lucid dreams, I can only fly 6 feet high or 2 meters high. Um, why is that?" And then I have to return them to their own beliefs. And basically, behind the beliefs, oftentimes you'll find emotions. They fear going higher than 6 feet because at 6 feet they could fall and it's not that big a deal. But what if they're 600 feet? Oh, and then they fell. Oh, that would be a huge deal. And oh, that would be so frightful and so concerning and so worrisome that they won't allow themselves to do it. And so they come to have a belief as a protective message, as a protective idea and all. So our beliefs oftentimes begin to connect with the lucid dream experience in such a way that the lucid dream experience will reflect back to us our own beliefs. But at some point, we'll see those beliefs as limiting. If you can only fly 6 feet high, then you're not going to explore the lucid dream environment very deeply. So, what I always encourage people to do in their lucid dreams is not only observe what happens, but what beliefs, expectation, ideas they had before that thing just happened, you know, to pay attention like, oh, now I think something bad is going to happen. And then what happens? Something bad begins to happen. And, or now I think, the most incredible, attractive person will appear from around the corner. Now the most incredible, attractive person appears from around the corner. And you begin to see that that's why lucid dreaming isn't about control. It's about more conscious, aware relating. So you have to become aware of your own thinking process within the lucid dream in order to understand that. And because you're relating to the unconscious in many regards. And without that understanding, you'll just think things are happening and, oh, now something strange happened, then another strange thing happened. You'll never connect it to your own thought process.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance between the things we are bringing to the lucid dream and the things we don't have any kind of form of action in that the lucid dreaming is bringing to us. So it's kind of a meeting of two worlds, two awarenesses, or however people want to see that. But yes, indeed, oftentimes, and especially in this practice, which is quite delicate as it is sensitive to our emotional states and hesitations and fears and so forward, it's especially true that usually the things that we get caught up in are not the real threat to us, but getting caught up in them is the threat. So once again, learning to train that observer, that can be very helpful in the waking life also, not just the dreaming life.
Right.
Okay.
I,
Mm.
I remember one lucid dream I had. Um, I was on a hill and I saw the bus had come, and somehow I knew that I needed to get on the bus. And so I started running down the hill, and there was a big area of kind of water and mud, and I jumped over it. And so I floated over the mud and water for about 20 feet. And that's when it hit me, oh, this is a dream, because that would only happen in a dream. And then I went to visit a friend of mine who's involved in esoteric Chinese Buddhism. And I found my friend and I decided that I wanted to help him achieve a higher degree of realization. And as soon as I had that intent, suddenly, as I held on to my friend, we began to fall in darkness. We were falling and falling and falling. This went on for minutes. But as a longtime lucid dreamer, I know that unexpected things happen. And I trust that the lucid dream will eventually do something to make sense of all of this. And so I just held on to my friend. We just kept falling in total darkness, total complete blackness, just fall, 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 fall. Anyway, after about 4 or 5 minutes of just nonstop falling, we finally get to where I see something. And here it was so interesting because imagine that you see the face of a dragon that's made out of points. They call it azure, which is blue-green. So this blue-green dragon face made out of points of light comes and looks at me as like finally I reach the dragon level. And at the time I was really surprised because here's the thing. It wasn't the Western version of how a dragon looks, like you might read in a book from, medieval England or something like that. It was the Chinese version of what a dragon looks like. And they look a little bit different, but quite similar, but a little bit different. And I was so surprised when I looked into the eyes of the dragon and it looked into my eyes. And that's when I decided to wake up and write this down. At that time, I didn't know anything about a blue-green dragon. And so I had to Google search blue-green dragon, and I found out that in Chinese, if you want to call it Chinese Buddhism and Chinese mythology, the blue-green dragon is the dragon of spring. And so there's 4 dragons that kind of protect the totality of things. And it was so odd to me, who had never read anything about that, to discover that. So sometimes I do think in some of these explorations, especially when you completely let go and surrender, sometimes that's when you come to experience something that almost is foundational to society, foundational to culture. You come to that kind of level of things. By contrast, you can come to a personal level of things. And here's an experience of that. One time I had a class where a woman said she had these stomach issues, and they were a big thing for her, that she had been dealing with these stomach issues, and that's why she was taking the class on lucid dreaming. She wanted to see if she could come to terms with her stomach issues. This woman was from Eastern Europe, and so for me, she expressed some ideas and beliefs that I don't hold. And one of them was kind of the idea of witches and evil spirits and that kind of thing. That for me, that's all stuff that a 10-year-old might think about, but it's stuff that by the time you're 40 or 50 or something, you've long let that go and it's no longer. But for her, this was kind of a real thing. She grew up in Eastern Europe, and witches and stuff. They were very serious, very real, very very whatever. So anyway, here's the lucid dream that brought this all home. So I find myself in a subway pavilion. And where I live, lived in a town of 60,000 people. We don't have a subway, and the nearest subway is just 1,000 miles away. It's not part of my experience. But what I noticed about this subway was the subway hall was just so grand and glorious. And so it's not like a New York subway, which is grimy and creepy. It's a grand and glorious one. And then I look over and there's this woman, the woman I've been talking about, getting into the subway. And so now I'm lucidly aware and I think, oh, I'm going to get on the same subway car. And so I get on the same subway car and I basically follow her. She gets off at another stop, goes down kind of a secret stairway. I follow her down the secret stairway. And then it was for me, it was almost hilarious. But for her, it was very serious. There were all these goblins and little creatures that in my American view, are just something strange and hard to fathom. But basically, I was seeing the fears and concerns and other issues that were at the root of her stomach problems, of her kind of emotional problems. And it was so interesting to see them because it's like you're following someone into a lucid dream such that you see their unique cultural symbols and that have nothing to do with you. It's just like you laugh at them because that's how strange they are. But for that person, I know they're very real, and I know other people from other cultures, if they followed me into a lucid dream and saw my symbols, they would laugh because they were outside of their cultural viewpoint. But it was really interesting, and I think pretty much from that moment on, I began to understand the women's issues uh, from a more sympathetic viewpoint, from a more compassionate viewpoint, and saw how she was really being kind of tormented by these ideas, some of which she had picked up in her childhood and was still carrying with her. And I'm happy to say that through lucid dreaming, she resolved the issues and became free of the stomach problems and all that kind of thing. But again, sometimes in these lucid dream experiences, uh, you feel like you deal with foundational to kind of the human psyche level. Other times you feel like you get to the person's symbology expressed, and it's that person's own particular symbols that you're dealing with.
Yes, those are really interesting examples of these different symbolistic dream figures that are helping us and guiding us in some way to understand a little more, perhaps, our encounters here in the waking life also. And relating to that, it's the perfect bridge to the next question, which actually I took from our Dream Speak interview, in which you interviewed me. And I'm going to put that in the description box also. But yes, I have stole one of your questions because it was a very good question. And now we can hear your answer on it. So, these dream figures, if we think about the dragon, for instance, do you think the dream figures have a sense of independence within you? Or do you imagine that they are sent as symbolic constructs by your inner awareness to make you aware of things?
Right. It's a little bit of a tough one. They might be one or the other, or a hybrid, a synthesis of the two. That they're my personal expression of some universal energy, and that's how we should think about them. The, it's so important to think that dream figures vary, and so again, um, we can talk about special subsets of dream figures, and do we get down to what someone like Carl Jung might call an archetypal level? Like when I have the experience of the azure, the blue-green dragon made of light, have I gotten to an archetypal level, or have I got to something fundamental to uh, um, all humans, the human realm, and all? It's it's a little bit hard to say definitively, but what I would say is that that some dream figures have an existence outside of my own psyche, and so they exist independently. They exist with their own agency, their own intent, their own goals, and they will exist after I'm gone, because they weren't dependent upon my mental energy, my perception, or anything like that. So, but that's a special subset of the dream figures.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And also, when I think about this symbolic constructs relationship with the inner awareness, I also think, how far does our inner awareness extend? Because surely we have the waking self and many versions of the waking self we have been throughout the course of our lives, and different states we experience in dreaming, wake life, lucid dreaming, meditating, and the variety of emotional selves that can be very different than to our more neutral self. But it seems that linking all of them together is indeed this inner awareness, which remains somewhat constant throughout our lives. And then thinking, how far does that inner awareness extend? Is it indefinitely, or is there a point that it just ends? But I think when we think about this question, it turns our focus also on the potential unity of all things, that and some states and points in time, all things just kind of collide into one. I don't know, something like this.
Right. As I went deeper in lucid dreaming and had some really amazing experiences, what I came to call it was the interconnected oneness, that in many respects we're all expressions of the interconnected oneness. And I'm just not talking about humans, I'm talking about all forms everywhere. They're expressions and part of the interconnected oneness. I remember one time I was um, engaging with my inner self, and so for those who might not have read my books or listened to the previous podcast, I learned in 1985 that you could ignore all the dream figures and ignore the dream setting and just ask a question of your unconscious mind or your inner self, if you prefer. And oftentimes you'd hear a response or the whole lucid dream would change and show you the response. But anyway, at this particular time, I was curious about awareness, and and I could see that my awareness was just a very small part of the whole big picture. And so I asked one time to to see my awareness as part of the greater awareness. And it was so interesting. Suddenly I saw in response this incredible geometric form.
Mm.
Just it was like a 4-dimensional geometric form. It's kind of hard to explain. And then I was shown that this little teeny tiny corner between two branching off geometric things, that's where my awareness was. My awareness was just this teeny small part of this whole greater grander thing. And so that's when I realized, that we do have to see it in some regards from that viewpoint, that our perspective oftentimes is quite limited.
Mhm.
And so that's why lucid surrender is so important, because then you get kind of a different perspective. You begin to see the depth of things. You don't automatically shut down those experiences. But anyway, we're part of something much larger. And that's the first thing you begin to learn, that besides the conscious self and the ego, there's also the inner self and beyond. And then as you begin to explore other things, you can begin to explore reincarnation, our incarnational lives, I believe, in lucid dreams. You can also explore probable lives in lucid dreams, lives that you didn't take because you made different decisions and went a different way. And so both of those areas are big. And then you can go beyond all that to another level that's almost alien to our 3-dimensional experience of life.
Mm. And it is interesting. I think it's also a practice. Of course, you kind of work yourself up, or it's a process. It doesn't all happen at once. And it's kind of like the dream life in general. It's not like a linear process in a sense. It's much more chaotic. You have bits and pieces here and there, big experiences here and there. And then I think it does require a respectable amount of time to start linking them together and start to understand the wholeness of things. But it does definitely give us an opportunity to connect with something, like you said, it's bigger than the self, but also some aspects of the self, I suppose, that are very much dormant in our waking life, such as the connection to possible reincarnation or past lives, or the unity of things, or the dream figures that will exist once the waking life self is gone. So this is really exciting and interesting territory to explore.
Right. But one thing you said, I'm going to differ with a little bit. Um, Everybody's path is going to be their own unique path. They will have similarities, and some of the similarities is each of us is going to have to work with our own fears and our own unique limiting beliefs. And that'll kind of explain why my path is a little bit different than your path. You didn't have the limiting beliefs that I had. I had the limiting beliefs that I had to overcome to keep moving further down the path. But yet I won't deal with your limiting beliefs because, oh, I didn't have those beliefs and they weren't problems along the path. Also, it comes to fears and emotions as well. Oftentimes I learned as I went deeper in lucid dreaming that I was avoiding things that brought up any sense of concern or fear. And I realized, and my lucid dream showed me that I couldn't grow unless I resolve fears,
Mm.
unless I resolve these concerns. Because until I resolve those fears and concerns, I would just stay kind of stuck and in the same place. But as I began to resolve the fears and the concerns, the beautiful aspect of it was not only could I go further down the path, but all the energy caught up in those fears and concerns returned to me and gave me new energy to go further down the path. And so that's the one thing I want to hope that people understand is that as you go deeper into lucid dreaming, not always, but on occasion, you're going to be shown an issue that you need to resolve. And when you resolve it, you're going to get so much energy. But sometimes it requires you to trust and have a sense of there's nothing to fear here. Or it has also a thing of you learning, like being attacked by the angry dog in the lucid dream, and you send it love and compassion, and then you watch it shrink down into a little fun dog and take it flying. These are the things that you learn along the way to give you kind of the self-confidence and assurance to keep moving down the path and keep growing as a person. But I see a lot of lucid dreamers, they'll work through some easy issues. They'll work through some simple limiting beliefs, but then they'll get to something big. And that's where they stop. That's where they stop. And
Yeah, yeah.
if
I can.
if if you're if you're going to go the distance, every time something's presented, you might not resolve it in that lucid dream, but you can resolve it in your own thought process, and oftentimes in the next lucid dream you'll have the right approach to resolve it and keep moving forward.
Mm. Yes, I can definitely relate to this. And this actually has been a very timely issue for me in my practice also, because maybe I don't have so much limiting beliefs because I'm just an explorer and I'm going to go and explore, and I don't like have a lot of fears. So sometimes I hope I had some fears stopping me to explore always the deep end before I'm necessarily ready for it. But then uh, one big limitation I did not see coming in any way was confronting my shadow self. And she was following me for 3 months. And I thought, oh my God, I am not going to progress anymore from this, because I may have an intention and may have an idea of who I want to be or what I want to do. But every time she came, it just didn't happen, because she is me. So as soon as she's there, I just get sucked into her, and that's it. Then I operate through my shadow there. And then the dream ends because I'm so frustrated because I can't get out of her because she's also me.
Well, I'll tell you my thoughts about that. You know, the shadow was kind of the idea of Carl Jung's of the denied, ignored, repressed parts of the self. The shadow isn't always something like super horrible or anything like that. Sometimes it's pretty simple actually, and not, but nonetheless, the shadow normally is something that we're not paying attention to, and oftentimes in the lucid dream it will appear, and then we need to know how to respond. What I learned in my dealing with the shadow and lucid dreams is, first, it helped if you ask it a question. Who are you? Because oftentimes you need it to explain what it represents. So it might be your fear of success, and you find the idea of success, you find it frightful because, oh, if I become successful, then I'll have to do this and this and this and this, and then I'll change, and my friends won't relate to me anymore because I'm so successful, and there'll be all this jealousy, whatever that shadow element is. It might be your fear of failure, it might be your fear of whatever, but oftentimes you have to find out first, what are you dealing with? And so asking it a straightforward question: who are you? What do you represent? And then at least you know what you're dealing with, and and again, it can be very complex because it might relate to childhood stuff that happened, or it might relate to other things going on in your contemporary life. But then I would say the next step is send it what it lacks. And sometimes that you have to reach down really deep inside yourself within the lucid dream, and you're mentally and emotionally sending it the energy that it lacks. If it lacks confidence, you send it confidence. If it lacks understanding, you send it understanding. If it lacks acceptance, send it all the acceptance you can. But normally when you do this, the figure, the symbolic representation will begin to change. It'll get smaller, less agitated, less negative, less whatever. And if you completely do it, then normally it'll burst into light, and that light energy will come into you, because that's where all the energy came from originally. It's all your unexpressed energy that's returning to you, and now you can use it in a creative manner instead of in a troubled manner, which normally the shadow results in. But it's a process. It might take you more than one or two lucid dreams to figure it out. It might also take you some thinking in the waking world about resolving it. Like, not everyone has this issue, so this is unique to me. Why is it unique to me? Okay, I understand the history, but how can I resolve this? What changes do I need to make to resolve this?
Yeah, yes, thank you for those points. And actually, there was somewhat of a breakthrough last week in which I was having a lucid dream, and there was a line of people like coming, coming, coming. And then came the shadow, and I was like, okay. But it was actually the first time I just kind of went past it, and I didn't get caught up. I'm too tired. You're more strong than I am, so it's okay. But she didn't take me anymore. She just passed away. So that was the first time she didn't take me anymore. But definitely, like you said, it's a process, and yeah, I will need to deal with her in the future lucid dreams for sure.
Well, now I'm curious. You said she didn't take you. What does that mean?
Oh, well, I mean, it means that I become her.
Okay.
That like if I am in a lucid dream, and I'm operating from my general lucid self, which is like way more neutral. But as soon as the shadow comes, my awareness shifts into her awareness. So I'm not myself anymore, I am her. And then after that, it's not like I basically lose all control of the dream. I am just writing and doing whatever she wants me to do. So that's what happens. I get sucked into that side of self, I suppose. Yeah.
Right. What's interesting, and what might actually be the case when it comes for us lucid dream explorers, is that sometimes you get any one of us gets caught up in what I would call um, kind of subconscious patterns. Okay, so there's the conscious self, but then there's sometimes these subconscious patterns that are under the surface, and only occasionally do we get into them in the waking state. But we know enough about ourselves that, oh yeah, here's that repeating pattern that happens when I find myself in this situation. Sometimes these might be connected to other life experiences or whatever, but But anyway, um, it's easy to get caught up in the energies of them and kind of let go and think of oneself as having no sense of influence in that moment. But you know what I'd ask you to think about is even in that experience, being caught up in that kind of new perspective or different view, uh, you still try to see what small thing can I change? What small thing? Doesn't have to be a big thing, doesn't have to be world shattering. Just can the larger Ruth, the waking Ruth conscious self just change one thing in this experience? And I think a lot of times when you just change one little thing, then you begin to understand, okay, I'm in a relationship here and I need to bring a new kind of perspective into this recurring perspective such that I can begin to work with it and work through it and get it resolved. But yeah, it can be a big thing. So thank you
Yeah,
for sharing a bit about that.
yeah, sure. And we can now move to our following subject, which pretty much stems actually from this. So that is the lucid witnessing relationship. So considering who we are in our waking life and who we are in our lucid life or in the lucid dreams, what would you say that remains constant and what differs from the waking Roberts and lucid Roberts?
Right. So so one thing I think any lucid dream explorer who goes quite a bit deeper, um, you begin to understand what's ego, what's persona, what's the mask that we wear. Normally, you'll see that relatively quickly, and hopefully, you have some understanding of it to begin with. That that sometimes the ego has wishes that really aren't very deep, aren't very well thought out, aren't very meaningful to the greater growth of the self, and so normally as with greater lucid living or lucid waking, you begin to see that focusing on those ideals is not in your best interest.
Mm,
I remember a friend of mine who's a relatively good lucid dreamer. Um, One time he became lucidly aware when he saw his grandmother, and he remembered that grandmother had passed away 4 or 5 years ago. And he really loved his grandmother. She was really very supportive and all that. And so they begin to talk, and the grandmother goes, "Look, sure, you want to be a Hollywood actor, and sure, you want to be famous, but what are your real talents? You're good at this and this and this. You're not good at Hollywood stuff." And I mean, she just, had a very honest, open conversation with him. And she said, "Look, you're never going to achieve your potential if you don't focus on developing the wonderful skills that you do have and quit chasing this crazy dream that, somehow at age 35, you're going to be discovered by Hollywood. And the next 40 years will be nothing but glory and happiness." She said, "You have these wonderful skills that you're ignoring because because your ego is caught up in this Hollywood dream." And then at the very end of the lucid dream, she gave him some advice that proved to be precognitive or predictive.
mm,
So this is kind of something that hopefully you begin to wake up to, because there's a lot of people, and especially young people, you have these kind of inflated ego ideas that, oh, I'm going to go to Hollywood, and oh, this is going to happen. It's going to be so great. Or, oh, I'm going to, whatever it is, make hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever. And if you do, that's great, and nothing wrong with that, and nothing wrong with being in Hollywood and stuff. But sometimes lucid dreaming helps us reflect back on our actual life intent, our
mm,
life goals, and um, and sometimes they have really not much to do with what the world would call success in the waking world. It has to do with letting go of fears, resolving relationships, healing, past traumas and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
That's where the true growth occurs and the true beauty occurs. And so I would say that's probably one of the first things that kind of falls apart on the path.
Yes. And I can relate to that, as also I feel that we say moving from or shifting from the waking self to the lucid self, there are clear differences. I have experienced that these external layers of the self are kind of taken away. So for instance, direct memory, I can give that as an example. So moving to the lucid life, I can't necessarily recall daily events or what happened at work or these kind of a details that I could probably go and recall if I wanted to, but also they do not feel so important being in the lucid dream. And the other thing is that I can imagine, and perhaps people want to use lucid dreaming to solve their problems, such as, how do I get more money, or how do I become successful, or these kind of a things. And sometimes I have thought about it that, yeah, very human life problems, I could take them to the lucid dream and try to solve them, but it could be a good logical approach because it seems that there is a connection to much wider source of information than in the waking life. But also, I have noticed that even if I set an intention for something like that, even I already know it's not. But if I set the intention for something like that and I recall it in the lucid dream, it's just realization it's not important. But it has nothing really to do with who you are, and it doesn't seem logical there to solve those problems that we may have here. But then what does remain, I would think, is the very source of being a human being. So this kind of a very strong energetical feeling tone and sometimes emotional tone, but I would say this energetical feeling is much more stronger than it is in the waking life. And in some ways, I feel that the experience of being human is more pure in lucid dreaming because these effects that have been affecting us by societies and work and money and relationships are not there. So what you experience, I suppose, is some kind of a core self.
Right, right. And also, one thing I would say, and one thing that I see oftentimes is that, with our outside friends or counselors in the waking world, you know, uh, you can lie to your therapist, you can lie to your spouse or partner, you can even lie to yourself. But in a lucid dream, when you're engaged with deeper levels of the self and what I would call the inner self, when the inner self makes something clear and you see the truth of it, it's hard to lie to the inner self. It's just like what you're being shown in these shadow experiences. You know, you have to accept the kind of the fundamental reality of it and then decide how you're going to respond. And so it's not like it's being shown to you in order just to torment you or to keep you held in place or something. The goal is growth. The grow is greater fulfillment, whatever that means. And so that was one thing that I was found really important. That inner self is like an educator who's trying to help us along the way. But an educator can't solve all of the problems for you. The educator can present the, the test or the question or the issue. The inner educator might give you some hints and some ideas, but they can't solve it. Once you solve it, then you'll get all the benefit of it. But until then, you can't. So the great thing about interacting with the inner self is you begin to see the real issues that are behind the issue. And also you see that you have all this support on the inner self's level, um, but but you yourself have to rise to the challenge. I remember in my free online magazine, Lucid Dreaming experience, probably a year or so ago, there was Lucid Dream article by a friend of mine, David L. Kahn, lives up in Minneapolis. But he titled his Lucid Dream article, "The Wound Behind the Wound." And in a lucid dream, he remembered that he wanted to heal, I think, some physical wound that he had experienced. But then his inner awareness made him aware of the emotional wound behind that wound. And until that emotional wound was healed, the physical expression was going to have a harder time. And so sometimes we have those kind of depths of what healing really means. But once in a lucid dream, I was kind of surprised. So I'm in this lucid dream, consciously aware, and here's some guys all dressed up in Buddhist robes and dark red robes, and one of them came up to me and said, "Have you ever heard the parable of the two arrows?" And I told him, no, but I really don't know that much about Buddhism, so I haven't heard the parable of the two arrows. And so then the guy explained the parable of the two arrows. And basically what it was is that there's a man walking from one village down a lonely path to another place, and suddenly out of the bushes comes an arrow that hits him in the arm. And he's stunned that someone would have shot him, and then he begins to think, why did this happen to me? Who's against me? Why is this, why am I having these kind of events, and blah, blah, blah. He starts all this kind of thinking, about the arrow. And so the Buddhist parable of the arrow was the physical action happened. But then the second arrow is all of our thoughts and feelings and ideation and paranoia and all these other issues surrounded with the first event. And so sometimes if the physical event happens and you just ignore it, then you go on with your life. But sometimes the second arrow becomes the big issue,
Mm,
like, oh, the world's against me, or everything's
mm,
dangerous, or no one can be trusted, or I'm trying to help others, but I'm always being kept down. That's the second arrow. And so the Buddha's point was that basically sometimes the second arrow can be much more harmful, much more
mm.
devastating than just the physical thing that happened.
Yeah, definitely, because it's deepening our experience of the first incident each time we return to it, and people can go on for decades returning to the first arrow. So of course you're digging and digging and digging and digging until it kind of takes over your thoughts and then affects you greatly. So it's a good example, the two arrows, definitely, I think, for a lot of people to consider, because I think every one of us do carry a second arrow about something that has happened to them. So that's how
Right.
we are with our thinking mind.
Right. I remember, I don't know, probably 15 years ago, this came to me. One day I'm walking along, and I'd call this a moment of lucid living. Um, Lucid dreaming had basically taught me that a dream and a lucid dream is a mental creation of the conscious self and the ego interacting with the larger awareness. It's a mental creation. And then I began to see that, oh, also, the waking world is fundamentally a co-creation of this conscious
Mm,
self and the larger self working together. And so I'm walking along, and in my mind, I can observe my mind blaming somebody. Oh, that bad thing happened, and it's all because of them and what they did. And if they would have done something else, then it would have been so much better. And blame, 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 blame. Suddenly, my inner awareness stops and says, if you create your own reality, then who is there to blame?
mm.
And whoa, that just stopped me right there. And now every time that I want to go into a blame cycle, I stop and I think of that comment. If you create your own reality, then who is there to blame? Because what lucid dreaming begins to show us is how we create our own personal experience through our beliefs, expectation, focus, intent, our will, and along with our inner self, we create the experience that we then experience. And when I started to see that that's also how the waking world works, that's when I realized, okay, I've got to start taking responsibility, and I've got to look at the issue. The issue isn't out there. Out there is a reflection of the issue. When I begin to resolve it internally, then through working on my beliefs, my expectations, and all, then it'll get resolved. In one of my online workshops, a woman was complaining about her friend, and so she'd call her friend on the phone, and her friend would just sit there and basically bitch about life the entire time, like, oh, this horrible thing happened, and oh, this horrible thing happened, and then I got charged too much at the grocery store, and then this bad thing happened, this bad. And the woman said that she loved her friend, but she hated having weekly phone calls that were just 30 or 40 minutes of just nonstop complaining and bitching about things. And she asked me, how do you resolve something like that? And I said, first you have to realize somehow you're connected to this. Somehow it wouldn't be part of your experience if you weren't connected to it. So I told her, look, here's a moment where you can do lucid waking. The next time you call your friend, just in your mind, without saying anything or doing anything, or when you meet for coffee or whatever, just send her love and compassion and understanding. Just sit there and listen and send her love and compassion and understanding. So the next time she came to the class, she said she did exactly that. And within 10 minutes, the woman stopped complaining and bitching. And the woman apologized for always complaining and bitching. And then the woman began to realize that, maybe things really weren't that bad after all. And maybe she should be thankful and grateful for the nice things she had in her life. And her friend, the woman who I had talked to, said she was just stunned because, in the last 2 years of interacting, it had always been bitching, complaining. And now when my person changed their mind and sent love, compassion, understanding, acceptance to the woman, suddenly that did something to the conversation such that the woman had to stop and begin to apologize for complaining so much and all. So again, we're caught up in relationships, and if you want to see your relationship change with someone who's difficult at work and something, change your mind. In a lucid dream, I see that when I change my mind or my belief or expectation about something, then the lucid dream changes. But this also happens in the waking world. If your boss at work is a total jerk and is jerky, you know, start to think something different. Start to think, no, I'm going to focus on his good qualities. He's articulate. He's clear. He has a goal. Oh, he's articulate, clear, and goal. When you start to focus on whatever qualities you can find that are positive or just send him love, understanding, acceptance, then you'll find that suddenly he begins to relate to you or to the whole team differently because we're part of an interconnected oneness. And our thinking matters. We've been taught that the outside world just happens by virtue of what the outside world decides. But somehow it's connected to us. Somehow it's connected to each person and our thinking. And so that's how you can kind of begin to wake up in the waking world to realize that out there is somehow connected to in here. And if you change in here, then suddenly out there will begin to change.
Yeah, sure. It's a field of connectedness, and it was a good example on how to bring some of the lucid practice into the waking life because they don't need to be distinct necessarily separate from each other because we are learning a lot in that practice. And when you were talking, I just remembered this quote. I can't remember which book it was from, but it was that, we really don't appreciate our enemies enough. Okay, these don't need to be our enemies in that sense, the boss or friend or something like this, but we don't appreciate our enemies enough because we rarely have too many of them and nobody else challenges us to grow as much as they do.
Right. There was uh, a writer here in the U.S. who wrote a wonderful book on active imagination. His name is Robert Johnson, and he was a Jungian analyst, and active imagination kind of came from some Jungian concepts. But I remember hearing that one time he was at a conference, and it was in the southern U.S., and he was talking about the shadow and how
Mm,
the shadow actually exists in our waking world, and as well as our inner world, and as a reflection of our inner stuff. And anyway, there was a woman who raised her hand in the audience and said, Mr. Johnson, I'm a good Southern woman. I'm a good Christian, and I just love everybody. I just love them, love them, love them. And and Robert Johnson thanked her and said, "Well, look, madam, if there's anyone in this entire audience that you don't want to sit by, that you don't want to interact with, that you want to ignore, that's your shadow. That's your shadow." And so that's such an important thing to also see, that the shadow also gets re-reflected out there in the waking world. You
mm,
know, who are the people that you never want to sit by? Who are the people that you want to do your best to ignore? Who are the whatever? And it's really very instructive, because sometimes as you begin to change your relationship in the waking world with whatever it is, it might be the homeless person leaning up against the you know, doorway or whatever, it might be the cop, or it might be the wealthy people, or it might be the super poor people, or, whoever it is. Each person is going to have their own unique kind of shadow element. But when you start to change your relationship to them differently and start to see the humanity in them, or the whatever the issue is, sometimes it can be really powerfully kind of open your eyes to, oh, I used to have that belief, or I was scared of poverty, so that's why I never hung out with poor people or something like that. But now I see they're just like me, except I have more resources than they do, and anyway, whatever it is, all these inner things that we learn in lucid dreaming have their waking component,
mhm.
where we can work on the issues and grow as people and unblock issues and keep moving forward.
Yeah, those are good points and good reflections for the waking world, because we do become very attuned to our own thoughts and beliefs and generally feel comfortable or surrounded by people who, at least to some extent, think the same way we do. So it kind of is a kind of human gathering process that sometimes it would be good to just step out of that and hang out with the people you would definitely not otherwise hang out with. So, yes, good pointers. Now we have talked a lot about lucid dreaming experiencings and translating them into waking life through our conversation. But which experiences can't we translate in waking life? Have you had any experiences that you have been unable to translate?
Well, um, so we're part of an interconnected oneness. So I'll just put that as my basic fundamental belief. Um, you know, I believe last time I told the story about my friend Paul back in my hometown.
Mhm.
Did I?
Yes.
And all. Um, so like, here's an example of something that occurred in my waking life that's a little bit along those lines. So there was this organization who was going to do a documentary on helping. I think it was 8 individuals who were having a difficult time relating to life, and had life issues, and so the documentary wanted to focus on alternative ways of healing that would help people who are dealing with life problems. And so they called me up and asked me if I wanted to be part of this, and all. And so I agreed. And it was going to be filmed down in Arizona, and gave me all the details. So I agreed, and it was probably about 6 weeks away, so that was good. And one day I'm driving to the grocery store, and oftentimes I find when my mind is not focused on anything, when it's just focused on something so simple, that's when sometimes big messages come. But anyway, I heard that someone will die at this documentary, and so I thought, whoa, no, 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 I don't want to be part of something where someone dies. And I hope I, I'd much prefer to be in a different probability where someone doesn't die. But my inner self told me someone's going to die. And so I thought about this and I thought maybe I should write the documentary people and say, my inner self is telling me that someone's going to die. But then I thought, they'll think I'm crazy, or they'll think that I have some weird desire. I'm going to secretly kill somebody or poison somebody or something. And so I thought, I can't do that. And then I thought, okay, I'm just going to make a prayer that everything happens for the best reason and just leave it at that. So I go down to the documentary. Is all very interesting. I had dreamt about the documentary before I got there, so I had kind of a rough idea of the 8 people and their issues and stuff like that. So anyway, um, I did one day in front of the cameras and stuff, working with the folks, and then the next day I was going to do a really incredible practice that I have people do in the waking state. But I get there and all the film crew is gone and the leaders of the documentary are gone. But still, this is part of the program. And so I'm going to have these people do my thing that morning. And so the people do the thing, kind of the lucid waking approach that I set up for them. And they're having profound realizations. And one guy is basically almost in tears about what he realized and all that kind of stuff. Finally, at noon, here come the film crew and the documentary. And they say, you don't know this, but last night, one of the film crew members died. And that's why we've been gone. And I thought, oh my God, that night I'd had a dream that Jim or Jimmy showed up and told me he was going to die. And I looked at Jimmy and I said, well, how do you feel about that? And he goes, oh, I know this is the exact right time for me to go. And so I don't have any regrets at all. And I asked him one other question just to be sure that he was okay with dying. And he said, yep, he knew this was the absolute best approach for everyone involved. And so basically I wished him well. I had no idea that the film guy's name was Jim or Jimmy. And also this film guy, he was so strong that in the nearby mountains, they had mountain trails named after him for rock climbing things, because this guy was so strong and vigorous. But yet that night he passed away in his sleep and didn't wake up. And so I told that to the film crew and the documentarians. And then I told them, well, actually 6 weeks ago, before I came to this event, my inner awareness kind of gave me the heads up that someone was going to die. But again, part of lucid dreaming is realizing that we're really connected very deeply. And there's a lot of stuff that we know under the surface that oftentimes doesn't rise to our level of awareness. And why it doesn't is because either we don't want to know, can't be bothered, we kind of filter it out because we're so engaged in the waking world stuff that we just filter out all the below the surface stuff. But that was kind of one example. And it kind of shows why it's so important to have kind of a meditative experience, or at least a quiet time during the day. If you're constantly on your phone or constantly on the computer or constantly doing this, and this, then where's the quiet time? Where's the time for your inner awareness to even rise to the level of consciousness, something that's in the offing? And so that was one thing that I really realized, that pretty much most everything is available to us, but a lot of times the conscious ego self is the limiting factor, because we're so focused on this outside world and doing all the stuff we do that we just never allow that kind of inner stuff to come, or we're afraid of it and keep it down because we don't want to know. So I'm one of these people. I've used lucid dreaming to work through basically any fear of death. And because of that, when I hear this kind of stuff, I'm not devastated. I know that death is part of the life process, and that even though people physically die, their conscious awareness continues on, even though their physical body has ceased to function.
That was a profound experience you went through. So thank you for sharing that. And sometimes I feel this practice is a bit paradoxical because as we have been talking, it does bring us towards this interconnectedness and unity and unifying experiences, but also it can be sometimes a bit isolating in the waking world when you have profound experiences. If you don't have people around you are familiar with the lucid dreaming practice and how then to tell about those experiences. And maybe for me, some of the experiences I feel that I cannot translate directly in the waking life is experiencing other senses than I would experience in the waking self. It sounds so crazy that it's not something that you would lift up if you're working a regular job or something like this, that people would just, yeah, you can tell that people don't always understand, and also language can be limiting. So, have you ever felt that the practice has felt isolating, or is it always unifying?
Fundamentally, my belief is that dreams fundamentally are help us feel unified and feel connected. And so that's one of the reasons that we spend almost 2 hours every day in the dream state is the different portions of the self need a way to communicate, need a way to exchange energy and all. And some of that happens in the dream state. And I think it happens most profoundly in the dream state. One reason I think the evidence supports that is when you talk to physiologists and neuropsychologists. Oh, what happens after dreaming? Oh, there's all this interior communication of hormones and all sorts of factors are going on, during the dream and immediately after the dream. So I don't think scientists see that as communication of all the layers of the self, but I literally think that that's what's going on, that that's there to keep us unified and connected. The unfortunate thing about the world is that the world, by virtue of following a certain set of world beliefs and a certain set of world viewpoints, has kind of disconnected dreaming from normal life. Where in this world do you talk about dreaming? And probably the only place, occasionally with a therapist, you'll talk about your dreams. And because they want to get some sort of sense of what's going on inside of you. Because if your dreams are nothing but nonstop trouble, then there's something going on inside of you that needs to be expressed. Even though you look very normal and nice and have lovely makeup and all that kind of stuff, there's something going on because uh, everyone doesn't have troubled dreams like that without some issues going on in their inner life or their outer life. So, so, so part of the problem with lucid dreaming and relating to the waking world is the waking world has gone so kind of ego-driven, egoic, kind of, especially here in America, kind of this consumer-driven culture and
Mhm.
stuff, and 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 we've basically become quite divorced from our own inner lives, from our own inner awareness, and 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 from our dreams. And I think our dreams have to them kind of alternate viewpoint that's valid and is always trying to correct us to help us get back on the proper path. But to the degree that society and our larger culture ignores dreams, uh, it's easy to get off the path. I remember in the eastern United States, when the um, colonists came and began to take over the eastern United States from the native cultures, there was a series of Native Americans in the Delaware area, and, and here's how they chose a new chief. They got together and began to report their dreams. When they needed a new chief, who was the tribal people dreaming about, and what were the dreams about? And so they didn't have a democracy, they had a dreamocracy. They realized that at inner levels they knew who the next chief should be. And so they began to report their dreams, and by virtue of their dreams, it was determined who would be the next chief. And so, imagine if society was such that we dealt with city problems by virtue of what the city members were dreaming about, and we dealt with leadership problems by virtue of what we were dreaming about. If people saw value and and betterment by virtue of recalling their dreams and interacting with their dreams, I think the entire world would change. People would start to see dreaming in a different factor, in a new factor, because but by seeing those dreams, it informs the community. You kind of learn where everybody's at, and and you oftentimes will learn what you're ignoring, or what the city fathers are ignoring, or what the country's ignoring, and you'll hear it in, in the fearful dreams of the young people, and whatever. So it's a little bit tragic, but that's what's happened. We've become divorced from our dreams. We've become much more connected to waking reality and all these little devices we have, and and so I think if we're to have a brighter future, part of it is through lucid dreaming, through seeing that, oh, dreams have value. Dreams help me resolve things. Dreams allowed me greater creativity, greater growth, greater fulfillment. And when we begin to see it through lucid dreaming, then I think it's easier for people to accept that I was aware within the dream. It wasn't just a crazy dream that happened. I knew what I was doing. I was investigating, exploring, experimenting, and I learned this, and I transferred it over to the waking world. And now I have a new way of healing myself in the waking world, because I see how the unconscious mind functions. So I think lucid dreaming might be the great thing that people don't understand. They don't see all the potential there because the culture is so divorced from dreaming to begin with.
Yeah. Yes, and quickly adding on to that, because I know we need to finish up soon. I've started the experiment that in general, when people meet for the first time, the socially accepted questions are, what do you do? Where do you work? And so forth, these kind of things. So I skip those entirely, and I ask a person, what do you dream about? And they often get a bit rattled up. Surprisingly often, they would answer that they don't dream, which is interesting.
And 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 I hate to say it's a little bit sad. I do know they dream, and they've just got out of the habit of dreaming. Some people have consciously or subconsciously decided to no longer remember their dreams, um, but but everybody dreams. Everybody dreams, even if they don't recall it. But anyway, I can see you're expanding your friendship circle quite a bit with your
Well, I don't know if it's
questioning.
making me very popular, but but I am running some experiments with people. No, I have a very good friendship circle that has survived for decades. So despite this madness of the lucid dreaming and out of body experience that have taken place in the last years, so they are very, very deep people. So
Yeah,
yes,
and
yes.
and part of it's an expression of your honest interest. You know,
Sure.
you're not you're not trying to whatever impress anyone or anything. It's really like I would like to know the real you,
Mm,
and by if you've ever been part of a dream group, and I encourage people to be part of a thoughtful dream group. Um, but if you're part of a dream group, within a couple of sessions, you'll know so much more about others. You'll be
mm,
so you're like, oh my gosh, this is so fascinating. And what I love about it is you get to the honesty of the human experience.
mm.
You just don't float on the surface where everything's supposed to look good and you respond in the socially appropriate way. And so everything's great. Um, when you begin to share dreams with people and work on dreams with people, you learn so much about them and also about your own self, about your own symbolism, your own ideation, your own, issues that you deal with. But it's really a beautiful way. I like being with real people, and I like having real conversations.
Mm.
Uh, I'm not against the socially appropriate, and there's a time and place for it. But when you get to the real person and the real depth, then you have a real connection. You have a real sense
And as
of
I see
connecting
it,
that.
time is our most valuable resource. So it's just better to be directly authentic in your own self, because I think it's part of Carl Jung's psychological insights that one of the greatest achievements of a human being is to rediscover the self through life and this individualization and the shadow elements again and all this. So final question now. We have explored this awareness and lucid dreaming and what we can learn about it, but what do you think this conscious awareness is learning through the human experience?
Well, um, so I would say the larger awareness has the creative challenge of dealing with the waking conscious self who keeps coming up with new creative challenges. And so the larger awareness is being challenged to come up with the point, how do I get that person on the path to greater growth and fulfillment? How do I get that person on the path to resolving those fears and concerns and limiting ideas? And so it's a mutually beneficial association. Um, it's just not one is omnipresent, omniscient, whatever. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. I feel so. It's all grist for the mill. It's all good for both parties. Otherwise, I don't think it would occur.
Thank you so much for this conversation again today and your time. Do you have any final thoughts you want to say?
You know, I hope people will think about this lucid waking idea and begin to practice it sometimes in the waking state. Instead of going to your normal kind of reactive mode, whatever that is, just think, okay, I'm going to treat this conversation as if it was a lucid dream. I'm going
Mm,
to send love and compassion and understanding to that person, whether it's my 8-year-old child or my 32-year-old wife or partner or whoever it is. I'm going to flip my mind and see what changes in this moment. And when you begin to do that, you'll realize that, oh, something more is going on here. And you can begin to treat waking life as if it was a lucid dream and then kind of enter a state of what I'd call lucid waking. So I
mm.
want to wish everyone the best. And Ruth, thank you so much for having me back on to talk about all this.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you for our listeners also, especially the ones who have made it all the way to the end of the conversation. And just for the listeners also, I want to ask that which of the questions or themes we talked about today raised the most thoughts, because it really does help to plan the future conversations also for people. Great. So thank you so much, everyone.